everyone, and welcome to another episode of Failure Decoded. We are talking about a very important topic today, which is negotiation. And I feel like negotiation really can't be understated. It's something that you do in your everyday life. I think whether you realize it or not, both professionally and personally at home. I remember probably my hairiest experience with negotiations so far was buying my first car, which was pretty stressful for me at the time. I just really didn't feel like I had the skills to handle that type of negotiation. And car salesmen, they're known for being very slick. So it was definitely kind of an intimidating process for me. But the thing is, negotiation can be learned just like any skill. And Shamsiya mentioned that she was taking a negotiation class and that she wanted to invite the professor because he had some really awesome kind of like real world examples of negotiation tactics. So I was like, that's perfect. Negotiation is a crucial skill for any entrepreneur, so it works great with our show. So Shamsiya, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Hello and welcome, everyone. So today we have George A. Siedel, who is a renowned professor on the faculty at the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan, and a world-leading negotiation expert. Professor's negotiation strategy combines theory with practical advice, which is summarized beautifully in his book, Negotiating for Success: Essential Strategies and Skills. Professor is also the creator of the world-famous massive open online course, which I had taken up, Successful Negotiation, Essential Strategies and Skills, which was started with a goal to just enroll 1,000 students, but instead saw an astounding number of enrollments with 1.5 million enrolled on all platforms and 1 million on just Coursera. So this just goes to saying that it's not a secret. People do not have negotiation skills the way they should have, and it's quite a scarce skill to have. I cannot negotiate. I know that for good. So that's why I wanted to take up the subject, and I now have Professor J. Siedel here to teach us a lot more about negotiating. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us today.
Well, it's great to be here, Shamsiya, and thank you for your kind words about the course. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much for the course. Sorry, that's a beautiful course to put up there. Thank you for working so hard on it.
Can we also just say kudos to getting 1 million? Would you say 1.5 million students? That's really incredible. So just kudos to you.
Well, thank you. It was a shock seeing those numbers. When I first developed the course, I was teaching around 100 students a year here on the University of Michigan campus. And so I wondered if perhaps the course would attract 1,000 students. And now it attracts between 3,000 and 4,000 per week and continues to be a popular course. In fact, it's the most popular business-related course in the world. For a so-called MOOC, a massive open online course. So I'm delighted. I especially appreciate the comments from people taking the course. I receive them every day about how they use the course in their daily lives, and not only in their careers, but also in their interpersonal relationships. So I especially appreciate those comments.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we launch into, I know we had a couple pre-planned questions that we were going to ask you, but I'd love to know how you got to this place. So you became a negotiation expert. What led you to develop these skills, hone these skills, and be able to package them, in such a popular course?
Well, when I attended university, I did my graduate work at the University of Michigan and Cambridge University. And there were no negotiation courses at that time. So after graduation, I was thrown into a law practice where negotiation was especially important, especially in resolving litigation, resolving disputes. And so I became very interested in negotiation in law practice. And then later, when I joined the university, I headed our executive education, where we negotiated with large companies around the world to offer them executive courses. And so I became interested not only in dispute resolution negotiation, but also deal making. And then I had an opportunity to develop a negotiation course at Michigan. After meeting with the head of Citibank in New York City, he encouraged me to develop a course on negotiation and dispute resolution. And so I developed the course and taught it on campus. for a while, and then the opportunity came to offer it online through Coursera. So that's the general evolution. It basically originated in my work as a lawyer and as an administrator doing deals and resolving disputes, and it eventually morphed into the course that I now teach.
So, Professor George Siedel, now tell us, there was this absolute need to start this course. So, can you go to the genesis of it? Why did you feel there was a need for it? And should we be negotiating at all?
Yes. Well, the genesis of the need related to my meeting with the head of Citibank. He really sparked my interest. He said that Citibank, one of the largest corporations of the world, was getting bogged down by disputes and getting bogged down in litigation. And so he challenged me. He said, why aren't business schools teaching negotiation and dispute resolution? And so I and several others, he invited representatives from the top 10 business schools. I and several others returned to our campuses, and we developed these courses. Now, to your second point, why should you negotiate at all? This is a question that I challenge my students with through an assignment. The assignment is go downtown and walk into a restaurant or walk into a retail store and try to negotiate a better price. And this assignment terrifies them. They said, how can we negotiate a better price when we walk into a McDonald's or another restaurant? I asked them at the beginning, what percentage of the students do you think will be successful? And most of them estimate around 10% of the students will be successful. Well, the last time I did this, I did this assignment, 60% of the students were successful. They obtained discounts ranging from 10% to 100%, and they achieved savings of close to $2,000, an average discount of around 45%. And so they realized that, yes, you can negotiate anything, even a retail price with a fixed price. But then that raised the question, if that's true, why don't people negotiate everything? And so I asked them to address this question, and I think the answers fall within three buckets. First of all, many people are very uncomfortable walking into a McDonald's and trying to negotiate a discount. They're scared. They feel awkward. They feel it's rude to ask for a discount. There are a number of personal reasons why they don't negotiate everything. Second, there's a very rational reason, and that is it takes a lot of time. And who wants to waste maybe an hour negotiating with McDonald's for a discount on a hamburger or whatever you're buying? The third, I think, relates specifically to your podcast. There's the risk of failure if you over-negotiate. For example, if you're negotiating a job offer and you push the potential employer too far, there's a risk that the employer will just walk away and will not be interested in negotiating. I use an example in the course of a person who was offered a job by a university, and she didn't really push aggressively. She just asked some simple questions like, how much time will I have for my research, etc., and they withdrew the job offer. And so there's always a risk of failure if you negotiate too much. So I think the very first question one should ask is, should I negotiate at all? And these are some of the reasons why people are reluctant to negotiate, even though they can be successful, as shown by the success of my students.
Wow. So, Rachel, do you have a question?
No, but I would also be terrified of that exercise, that first assignment. You said even just hearing that, my stomach got butterflies. I was like, oh, I couldn't do that.
I think most people I would just think it's quite unethical. I mean, they have a price, so why do we have to negotiate? But I think that's just your brain telling yourself not to negotiate. Right?
But yeah, maybe that's our own bias, right? It's like we just assume that it's like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like slimy to try and negotiate. It's like, oh, who does that? People that are, maybe cheap or whatever, some kind of like bad association. But Professor, I'm hoping you can help us. Did you coach your students at all before you gave them that assignment? Or did you say, here's your assignment, go about it in however you think is the best way? Or what's the process there for that first assignment?
I did not coach them, although they were armed with the concepts from the course. And these are concepts, with your permission, I'd like to discuss in a minute. What are the general concepts that someone should have in mind, whether you're negotiating a discount at a retail price or whether you're involved in a more serious negotiation, purchase of a house, purchase of a car, etc.
Yes. So that brings me to the next question. So once you decide to negotiate, what are the key concepts that you should keep in mind to avoid failure and, have a successful negotiation?
Okay. First of all, I would put these into 4 buckets, but the first bucket would be very familiar with your numbers. Rachel mentioned buying her first car in that negotiation. So let's use that example to illustrate the key numbers that you should be thinking about. Let's say that I am offering my car for sale for $5,000 to Rachel. And she's preparing for the negotiation. What key numbers should she consider? By far, the most important is something called BATNA, B-A-T-N-A, which is her best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, if my negotiation with Rachel falls through, what is her backup? So let's say I'm offering my car for $5,000, but Rachel knows that she can buy a similar car for $4,500. That is her BATNA. That is what gives her power in a negotiation. She knows that she can get a car elsewhere for a cheaper price. So that's the key number whenever you prepare for a negotiation. The second key number is what you and I would call your bottom line. Economists call it your reservation price. What's the most that Rachel is willing to pay for a car? And let's say in this case she saved up $5,500 to buy a car. So that's the most she can pay. The third key number is your target. What is a reasonable goal? Now in this case, hopefully Rachel has done some research on what similar cars would cost. And so she has a general notion. Maybe she thinks, well, a reasonable cost is $4,300, and that's my goal. And then finally, and this is a very important number, what is her stretch? So she knows her reservation price. She knows she can pay up to $5,500. She knows her target, which is $4,300. But does she go into my negotiation asking for her reservation price? Did she say, can I buy your car for $5,500? Well, of course not. Does she say, can I buy your car for $4,300, my target? No. She starts at something even lower, which is a stretch. So she might come into this negotiation, she might say, George, can I buy your car for $4,000? And the reason why that's such an important number is that the research shows that the people who are most successful in a negotiation are the ones who have the largest stretch goal. Now, the risk of failure here, since your podcast focuses on failure, the risk of failure here is that you will pick a stretch goal that is so unreasonable that the other side will walk away. So if Rachel says to me, George, I'll offer you $1,000 for your $5,000 car, I'm going to laugh at her and I'm going to hang up the phone or I'm going to walk away from the negotiation. So her challenge is picking a stretch goal that is a stretch, but it's also a reasonable target, that she has some basis for explaining why she chose that as a stretch goal. So those are are the key numbers that anyone should keep in mind during any negotiation, especially the BATNA, because that gives you leverage, that gives you power. What's my BATNA? What's my reservation price? What's my target? And what's my stretch goal? Now, once you have those numbers in place, there are three other concepts that are very important. One is that you should begin every negotiation by trying to get to know the other side as an individual. A friend of mine, Roger Fisher, wrote a book called Getting to Yes. And in that book, he describes a negotiation he was involved in South America. Basically, Peru and Ecuador were involved in a border dispute, and they were on the verge of war. And they invited Fisher down to try to help them negotiate a settlement of their dispute. Well, he started by bringing together the leaders of the two countries and putting them into one room. And then he paired them off and asked them to go off into a separate room and talk one-on-one. So he asked the two prime ministers to meet one-on-one, the two top economics ministers, the two top generals, etc. And then after an hour, they all returned to the main room. Well, he noticed when the two generals returned to the main room, they looked very upset. And so he was concerned, and he walked over to them and he asked them, how did your conversation go? And they said, our conversation did not go well at all. We did not even discuss the possibility of war. Instead, when we started to talk, we discovered that both of our young daughters have the same rare bone disease. And we spent the entire hour talking about how to get medical help for our daughters. And so we failed. We did not discuss the war at all. And Fisher's point was, no, you have not failed. You have succeeded more than anyone because you started by getting to know the other person as an individual and realizing that you share common interests. So that's the starting point for any negotiation. I've had some personal experience with this. When I was head of executive education, I wanted to start a center in Paris. And so I learned that a new university was building a building that had some floor space that would be ideal for my center. And I wanted to persuade them to lease me the floor space. So I flew to Paris with a couple of other faculty members, and we met with the president of the university and the dean of their business school. We scheduled a half-day meeting. But before the meeting, the president of the university took us out during the evening to a quaint French restaurant on the left bank. And we had a long dinner at this restaurant. And during the dinner, we learned that he had completed his doctoral dissertation on an English poet and mystic by the name of William Blake. And it turned out that one of our faculty members loved William Blake. He was a William Blake fanatic. And so they spent the entire evening talking about how great William Blake is. Frankly, I never want to hear another word about William Blake. But as a result of that conversation, the following day, we walked into the meeting for our half-day negotiation. And the president had developed so much trust in us because of that conversation. He's gotten to know us so well. He basically said to us, you can have a half floor in the new building and you don't even have to pay rent. He did charge us a percentage of profits, which we knew we were going to have to pay anyway, but no ground rent. And this was an amazing result because in Paris, real estate rent is so high. So I think I owe all that to William Blake and that conversation where we got to know him and he got to trust us. So in addition to knowing the numbers that I talked about earlier, the second concept is getting to know the other side at the beginning of a negotiation.
Do you have any, sorry to interrupt you, I just want to ask, because I feel like it is true. People tend to go into these negotiation processes with like their guard up. It's like there's a wall up, and it might feel like it's going to, they're preparing for like a battle. How do you recommend bringing the guard down? Like, is there any, I know everyone's different, so obviously you have to get to know the person right on a personal level, but are there any tactics to like figure out, what you have in common?
Yeah. Well, that actually is a good lead into the third point I was going to mention, which is the importance of asking questions. But let me add something else to this, Rachel, and that is in some countries, and America, sadly, is one of those, we have a notion that time is money, and we try to be super efficient. And so we might schedule, let's say, 1 hour for a negotiation, and we walk in and we say, let's get right down to business. Let's talk about the issues. So there's a structural question here. You want to schedule time to get to know the other side. And then I think things can flow quite naturally if you have an interest in the other side, if you ask questions about family and movie interests, book interests, even career interests. But there's a structural question here, just scheduling the time in the way the French president did when he invited us out for dinner at this quaint French restaurant on the left bank. But this does lead into the third key skill or concept, and that is the importance of asking questions. And the reason why that is important is information is what gives you power in a negotiation. Some people think of negotiation as trying to persuade the other side to do what you want. But the really great negotiators might not be great persuaders, but they are great at asking questions and gathering information about the other side. And there's a cultural element here. Some cultures are better at asking questions than others. For example, there were studies comparing Chinese negotiators with German negotiators. And what the study concluded is Chinese negotiators ask many more questions than the German negotiators. And that means that the Chinese negotiators are gathering way more information than the German negotiators and building their power. And one of the reasons why asking questions is so important is that to build a so-called win-win negotiation that benefits both sides, you have to understand the interests of the other side, not only their positions, but their interests. And so it's important to not only ask them, what do you want in this negotiation? But the more important question is, why do you want it? And that allows you to uncover the hidden interests. And if those interests match your interests, you might be able to build something that benefits both sides. Both sides come out in a better position rather than the traditional win-lose negotiation, where for one party to win, the other party has to lose. And then finally, there's a last concept that's very important related to asking questions, and that's the ability to listen to the other side, to listen carefully. This is a critical skill in negotiation. You and I are often very good at asking questions. For instance, in a social setting, for a party or something, we can ask questions to other people, but we're not very good at listening carefully to their answers. And the reason for that has been called the next in line effect. When you ask a question to someone, often you're not thinking about their answer. You're thinking about what you're going to say next. What can you say next that sounds intelligent or sounds funny or whatever? You're the next in line to talk. And because of that, you don't listen carefully and you you miss key cues that could allow you greater negotiation success. Now, I've got some bad news for males who might be listening to this podcast. And that is, there have been some recent studies of brain scans that indicate that men actually have a defect in their brain which prevents them from listening carefully. Now, this is something I think women have realized all along. They didn't need brain scans to tell them that men are not good listeners. But these brain scans in the fMRIs indicate that if you're a male, you have to work harder because of this challenge in your genetic structure, your brain structure. You have to work harder to listen carefully to the other side. So, in a nutshell, I realize we're covering a lot of material in a short time here, and I don't know exactly how much time you have left, but those are the key concepts. First of all, do you have your numbers in mind in preparing for a negotiation, especially your BATNA? Second, have you scheduled time to get to know the other side at the beginning of a negotiation? Third, are you asking questions during a negotiation rather than trying to persuade the other side to listen to you? And then finally, are you listening carefully to the answers? Listening carefully, by the way, is not only a key skill for a negotiator, it's a key skill for any leader. I worked for several years with one of the large international consulting firms, developing an executive program for them. And once I had a chance to have lunch with one of their leaders, and I asked him this question. I said, look, many of my students are very bright, and so there's no question they have the intellectual ability. But why is it that some of them move to the top of an organization and others get stuck in a middle-level position? I asked him, based on your experience working with business leaders around the world, why does that happen? And he said, well, there are two basic reasons. Number one, people have to have the skill and expertise and knowledge of a business. That's sort of obvious. But second, the second factor that leads to some people moving to the top is what he called the ability to hear, the ability to listen to other people carefully and build on that knowledge in building a successful business. So listening carefully is not only a key attribute of negotiation success, it's a key attribute of leadership success. So those, in a nutshell, are the four key areas to focus on in a negotiation, the four key concepts or skills.
Yeah, I found it pretty funny when you said that men have a defect in their brain that doesn't allow them to listen. I was like, oh, that checks out.
I'm sorry,
I'm only
man,
kidding.
I didn't mean to ask you, but I've got to stick with the research here.
Right, there's science. But anyway, all jokes aside, so I just want to recap quickly. I know you recapped that. So, okay, say you're now equipped with those skills. You know your numbers, you know how to kind of break down those walls, and you know to listen generously rather than just, thinking about what you want. I'm kind of curious now how you essentially close. That's more of a sales term, is like the close, but say you have all those skills. Is there like a mindset you can get over to maybe get over the fear of negotiation? Because I can understand all those skills, and you kind of said it. You're like, my students, they're bright, they understand the concepts, but I still think there's maybe like a misconception about negotiation that keeps people back from just asking for what they want. Do you have any tools for that, like how you can overcome that, or any key phrases or lines, something that you can use to kind of get that position of power that you kind of kept mentioning in the conversation?
Right. Well, I think that I don't have an answer to that. I don't know of any key phrases that would be useful. I think the important thing is to stick with your strategy, to understand your goal, understand your BATNA, which gives you power, understand your target, and just focus on that. Because you're going to run into people who appear to be very unreasonable. They might yell and scream at you. They might threaten you. And the goal is to just keep calm and keep focused on your strategy, especially if you have a strong BATNA, you have the ability to walk away at any point. I think that focus is very important in closing the deal. There were some studies done several years ago of lawyers negotiating, and they taped the lawyers. And many, lawyers can be very loud and boisterous, annoying sometimes. And what they discovered is that the lawyers who were loud and annoying and threatening did not do as well as others who focused on their strategy. In fact, the star lawyer of the ones they taped was a woman who was sort of modest and a little bit meek. She wasn't loud, she didn't threaten, she didn't yell, but she knew what she wanted, and she kept going back to that, focusing on her strategy, and she out-negotiated all of the loud, mainly men, lawyers who were more threatening and boisterous. So I think closing the deal is not so much a matter of phrases or using a particular words. It's more a question of focusing on your strategies, and hopefully through your questioning you've identified the interests of the other side. So to close, what you want to do is to match those interests with your own interests and build something that benefits both sides. I think that's the key strategy for success.
A lot of good points there, but before we wrap up, we will wrap up now in 2 minutes. Is there any tool that we should really avoid when we are negotiating? Something that, red flags that could raise red flags that you think, no, this is not that you should be taking to the field, that you can just tell us?
Okay, well, in terms of tools, this is one key takeaway, I think, from this podcast. I've developed a website that has the key negotiation tools. For instance, it includes a negotiation planner that asks the key questions relating to BATNA and your goals, etc. So the key takeaway is if anybody Googles the phrase negotiation planner, this will be the very first thing that comes up. It's entirely free, and it includes a list of several tools, not only in planning negotiation, but in analyzing your own negotiation style, in building your negotiation power. It's got a list of psychological tools you can use. And one of these, to answer your question more specifically, to avoid failure, is something that I call a life goals tool. And I discovered this a few years ago. The American Bar Association asked me to give a talk at their annual meeting. And they paired me up with a person who is considered the leading mediator in the world. And I was very excited to be paired with him because I thought this is a great opportunity to learn some of his secrets. And he introduced to me this concept of life goals, the importance of stepping out of the specific negotiation and thinking more broadly about what you want in life. And if I might, if we have enough time, I just like to give you a brief example of what I'm talking about. And he used this example. There was a couple in Sydney, Australia, who were getting a divorce. The husband was very powerful. He was a leading figure in the medical community. He was a prominent doctor. He was very successful, had a large number of friends. His wife, whom he was divorcing, was had very few friends. She tried to start a business. It was unsuccessful. She just was not living a very happy life. Well, they divided up all of their assets and got down to the last $50,000 and couldn't agree on who should get that $50,000. So they brought in this famous mediator, and he said, okay, why don't you each separately sit down and ask yourself, what do you want out of life in terms of your retirement, your friendships, your future, your relationship with children, etc. Well, the wife did this. She thought about her life goals. The husband refused to do it. Okay, finally, they resolved the dispute. I think they basically split the $50,000. Came time for the divorce hearing. They walk into court. The husband walks in with several of his friends. They're very loud and happy and jubilant. He's finally getting divorced. They sit on one side of the courtroom. The wife sits on the other side of the courtroom with a couple of her friends very quietly. The judge pronounces them divorced, and the husband and his friends leave the courtroom, again very jubilant, and they walk out of the courtroom and turn right and walk down to one of the fanciest restaurants in Sydney, Australia to celebrate. The wife quietly walks out of the courtroom, and as she's walking out, she turns to the husband's attorney and she says to him, now it is time to get even. She walks out of the courtroom, turns left, and walks down to the office of the local medical society. She walks in and she says, I want to file a complaint against a physician. Is this the right place? And they say, yes, it is. So she said, first of all, my first complaint is that this physician, my ex-husband, performed an illegal abortion on me. And second, my ex-husband is sending drugs illegally to his relatives in another country. She destroyed him. The medical society revoked his license. He could no longer practice medicine. He lost his positions. He lost his income. He lost everything. Huge example of failure. Where did he go wrong? If he had followed the advice of the mediator, if he had stepped back and thought about the goals that he wanted out of life in terms of family, friends, future career, he probably would have given his ex-wife the entire $50,000 and even more. He would have looked at that negotiation a lot more seriously. So I guess my parting words of advice is develop the ability to step back from the specific dispute you're involved in or the specific deal and look at the big picture, look at it more broadly in terms of what you want out of your life. We're only here on this planet a short time. What do you want during this time on Earth, and how does it affect the specific negotiation you're involved with?
I think that's just great life advice in general for anything. I mean, especially us as entrepreneurs, right? We get bogged down, I think, in the day-to-day and all the stresses. So yeah, taking a step back. I do that occasionally. I'll take a step back and say, okay, like what's the big picture here? What's the big goal? What do I want 5 years, 10 years from now? So that's just like a great piece of advice, just generally. So I appreciate that.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Well, it's been great talking with you, Shamsiya and Rachel, and very excited about your podcast. I think too often in business schools, everyone focuses on success and happiness, and they use examples of how companies become successful, but they overlook the fact that there are so many failures. And how do you decode those failures, and how do you build on the knowledge that results from those failures? So I'm very excited about your podcast and wish you the best of success with the podcast.
Thank you. That's exactly why we started it, because I listen to a lot of business podcasts and it's always people saying, I sold my company for millions of dollars, or I raised X amount of money from VCs or whatever. I'm a 30 under 30, like all these accolades. But yeah, not many people focus on failure, yet everyone experiences it. So we really appreciate you coming in. We're trying to have experts come in to help our audience learn the skills that they need to mitigate that failure and learn from it. So we really appreciate you taking the time. I know we're right up on time here, but in the show notes, we'd love to plug your course. We'll put a link to it. I know you've written a couple books too, so I'm not sure if there's any last things you want to just mention that the audience can find to learn a bit more about your work.
Well, I think the key is to go to the website and again, the search term is negotiation planner, and that describes the course, it describes the book, and it includes the free checklists that people can use for negotiation success. Just in closing, I'll mention I receive many emails of how people have used the negotiation planning checklist. For example, a U.S. expatriate, CEO of a Singapore company, said that he was negotiating and he was just about ready to close the deal when he went through the checklist, and he was able to save $4 million as a result of using the checklist. So those are the stories I love to hear. But there are, it's not only big deals. It can be used negotiating with your cell company or with your landlord or for a job, etc. So negotiate. I think the key takeaway is type in negotiation planner, and hopefully the free tools will be useful to you.
That's great. I think I need to use that.
Me too.